Hey there, and welcome back to Behind the Line. I'm your host, Lindsay Foss. If you're new to Behind the Line, what you should know about me is that I'm a clinical counselor specializing in trauma therapy. And after over a decade working with first responders and frontline workers around issues like burnout, compassion fatigue, PTSD, and related OSIs, I have become a passionate wellness advocate and educator for those who sacrifice so much for our communities out on the front lines. Behind the Line is a place for us to talk about the real life behind the scenes challenges facing you on the front lines. I created this podcast with the hope of bringing easy access to skills for wellness, allowing you to find greater sustainability both on the job and off. Today, we are digging into a new series called Family of Frontline Heroes, where I get the chance to speak with spouses and adult children of frontline helpers who will be sharing about their experiences, the challenges that they have faced, the joys associated with supporting someone on the front lines, and the needs they see for both frontline helpers and the families that love them. My hope is that all of you listening will also encourage your family members to listen in and connect more together around how the job is served not only by you, but also by your loved ones vicariously. And I hope that offers opportunities to open new conversations around what's cool, what's hard, and how you might support one another in the midst of it. I am so grateful to be joined today by the lovely Rebecca Lynn. Rebecca Lynn is the founder of ProudPoliceWife.com, a nationally recognized blog where she provides support, encouragement, education, and resources to law enforcement families. She's also the founder and host of the annual Police Wife Conference, a virtual conference featuring highly sought-after speakers and resources to law enforcement spouses internationally. Rebecca Lynn is the author of The Peacemaker's Wife, a journal for reflection and encouragement for police wives and girlfriends, and Proud Police Wife, 90 Devotions for Women Behind the Badge. She holds a degree in psychology and a master's degree in education. Rebecca's husband has been in law enforcement for 14 years, and they have 3 small children. Let's jump in. Well, let me open up by saying welcome, Rebecca, and thank you so much for being here with me. I'm really excited to have you, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have some of these conversations with people who are, most of the time our interviews are with first responders, frontline workers themselves. I'm so thankful that we're getting to have this series where we get to invite people in who are in the position of caring about someone who's in that role, and seemingly kind of peripheral to that, but very directly, like how that gets to happen is because of the support systems that our first responders and frontline workers have. And so I'm grateful for you being here. I'm grateful for some of the work you're doing. I'm excited to talk a little bit about that too. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Honored to be here as just one of the people that you're having on to, talk about what life is like kind of, behind the line and for our family and what that looks like for families of frontline workers. And because truly it's not just the frontline worker that serves, it's the whole family unit. It impacts us tremendously. So I'm honored to be here.
Amazing. Well, why don't we start by just having you tell us a little bit about yourself, Rebecca, how you're connected to a frontline person, and a little bit about your story.
Sure. So, yes, my name is Rebecca. I live on the East Coast with my husband and kids. My husband has been in law enforcement for just over 16 years. We are actually high school sweethearts. And so we were together before he became a police officer and then after. So I can kind of talk to the fact that just changes happen, relationship changes happen before and after
Yeah,
entering this line of work. And it's not all bad either. There are good perspectives,
totally.
to it too. And so my background is actually in education. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in education, and that is where I initially started work, was in an elementary school after college, and right around the time that my husband and I got married. He was already in law enforcement. He did the academy and stuff when I was doing my undergrad. Um,
Mm,
and I taught for about 7.5 years. And after that, started staying home with our three kids. And honestly, early on in my husband's journey within law enforcement, I remember just feeling sort of alone. I know I wasn't physically alone. I had family that was supportive. My husband, obviously, we navigated this together, but I just felt like I was very naive to what a changes we would go through sort of with his job.
yeah.
And I couldn't find any resources. And when I did Google
Mhm.
things, they were just very negative. And
Mhm.
I just felt like there wasn't a lot of information out there. Fast forward to many years later, I'd still had it on my heart to, I'll say, serve this community in some way, knowing that I couldn't find resources, knowing that there were other people that couldn't find resources. I had talked with some spouses or significant others, and they were sort of in the same boat. And it just led me to where I am at now. I created a website called proudpolicewife.com, and I just started it as a
Mhm.
blog, as a way to document our experiences with this journey. And little did I know it would turn into my full-time job. And I
Yeah.
absolutely love it. I provide just support and resources to law enforcement families, and really first responder families in general, because there's a lot of similarities with what we all go through. And
Mhm.
so I created the blog, and years after that, the social channels and my own podcast, and I have a book called Proud Police Wife. And we even do a conference, which I'll mention towards the end. But I wanted to just find a way to give resources that were honest. Some of those, some of what I share, yeah, it's hard, but there's other aspects of what I share that there are so many good things because of this lifestyle.
Mhm.
And not everything has to be bad and scary. And so I just wanted to really fill in those gaps, and be a voice for one, the people that are going through this, and two, for those families that are really looking for resources. I wanted to share that and give those resources. And if I couldn't provide the resource, I wanted to be able to connect with other podcasts, organizations, people that do provide that resource, and share about it either on my website or on
Mhm.
social media and things like that. So that is me in a
Hmm.
nutshell.
I love it. I love when, because I think that's how this started too, was this like place of, why doesn't this exist? Like,
Right. Right.
why, when I go looking, why am I not finding what really the need is right now? And then
Yeah.
how that inspires the like utilitarian part of us. It's like, well, then I guess I'll make it.
Right. Right.
And I love that you took this piece that was your experience and turned that into something that is able to be shared with other people who are sharing that same experience or
Thank
variations
you.
of that same experience, because
Thank you.
absolutely it's needed.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And I saw that,
Now,
like, I, didn't think, I thought, okay, some people will read the blog, my mom,
mhm.
my husband,
Right? Those
a
like
couple
9 friends on
friends.
Facebook. Yeah.
Right. And then I shared, and within the first 3 months, there were like 30,000 people reading. And I was
Wow.
blown away and I was getting so many
Yes.
messages that I couldn't keep up, so many messages. So I thought, okay, this resonated. I wasn't expecting it to go to this direction, but it did. And
Mhm.
it's really incredible.
That's amazing. Well, and you shared this piece about like being surprised that you couldn't find resources. And I'm
Yeah.
curious, it sounds like there was this awareness of the aloneness, and it sounds like that piece of the experience felt surprising for you. And so I'm curious,
Yes.
what did you think it was going to be like when you imagined, like, as high school sweethearts, knowing that this is the trajectory that his career path was planning to follow? What
Right.
did you imagine it was going to be like? Like, what were the expectations on the front end before you were really deep into it?
Honestly, I had none. Like, I know that sounds silly, but I literally did not
Yeah.
know. Like, he
Yeah.
talked about going into law enforcement, like, right around the time that we got out of high school. And I knew right
Mhm.
away that that's what he wanted to do. But I had no experience with my dad was military, but way before I was born. And so
Right.
I didn't grow up around that lifestyle. So I really had no idea what to expect. I
Mm.
knew that his job would require, I felt like, more of him than
Yeah.
maybe like a more civilian job. So I understood
Sure.
that. Um, but I just really did not expect for us to have so many experiences that myself or others could not relate to, or that we would have to have so
Mm.
many conversations about how his job impacts us as a family. And I really did not know what to expect at all. And it was really as soon as he got into the academy, I started seeing changes. And that's when I was
Mhm.
like, wow, like, Rebecca, you were really naive. And so,
Mm.
I just saw changes with one, us having a lack of time to communicate effectively or communicate the way that we used to communicate.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure, like, is this normal? Are the things that we're going through, are they normal? Or are we just
Mm.
having a really hard time adjusting to this? Um, Also,
Yeah.
he was just so thrown so much information that is, very heavy topics through the academy and
Mhm.
FTO. And he's having to process that stuff on his own. And, I would even help him study, I remember, because they spent a lot of time studying outside of the academy at home. And I remember
Mhm.
helping him and me being like, whoa, some of this information is very triggering to me. Like, I had not even
Yeah.
had conversations about. So it was things like that. I'm like, how do I even help him through the academy? Is,
Mhm.
we went through like one schedule in the academy, one schedule in FTO, and we had no idea what he was going to do once he hit the road for his schedule.
Yeah.
So it was just a lot of ups and downs, and I did not know how to navigate that. And you mentioned loneliness, and that was something that I had neighbors I was close with, I had family that lived nearby, but it was still a sense of we were, about to get married, and we
Mhm.
are on, kind of a new, different journey as a couple, meaning I'm finishing school and, we're ready to kind of start our lives together. Yet we're in this new season of challenges because of his job. And so I
Yeah.
felt, lonely in the sense that we weren't able to connect like we had done in the past. Yes, we worked through that and figured those things out, but it wasn't without struggle initially. And so
Yeah.
I did feel lonely, and he worked completely opposite shift than me. And so for a number of years. And so it was kind of, just me having to figure out, like, okay, what do I do with my time? Of course, I had my own job and I had my own life and my own hobbies and things like that, but we were out of routine. The things that we
Yeah.
used to do, like in the evening time together, we didn't do that stuff anymore. And
For
so
sure.
there were just so many new things to navigate that I didn't know. And I felt like it just smacked me in the face once he started, because I never thought of those obstacles before.
Mhm.
And again, like, I would Google and all I would see are like scary divorce rates, or, not positive stories. And there just really wasn't a place that was where someone was sharing or talking about how this was impacting them. It might be an article where you can't talk to that person, but there was really
Mhm.
not a person out there sharing what it was like for them and how they got through it, or the positives,
Yeah.
that exist in addition to the cons. So yeah, truly, I
Yeah.
had no idea.
Hmm. Well, and I mean, it's so interesting because I think that there are those families that are like intergenerational, right? Like the police
Right.
families that have been police families going back 3 generations.
Yeah.
And I think when you join into a family like that, there's maybe different scaffolding in place
Right.
to help support you as the person joining into that to feel prepared for what's coming.
Right.
Um, so to be someone who's not a participant in a system like that, I mean, I think those systems have their own challenges, but
Right.
like to some extent, I think being kind of naive also invites us into like recognizing how not in alignment this feels, and it makes
Right.
us adjust it differently and sooner, maybe. Um, and it sounds like you guys have been able to find ways to navigate through that, which I'm really excited to talk a bit more about in a little bit.
Yes.
I'm really curious how you feel. Like we've kind of talked about this piece about early in that transition time and adjusting, how that felt. I'm curious over the course of time, now that you guys have been married, I think 15 years and have kids and have gone through like the many stages of
Right.
life in coupleship. How do you feel that your husband's profession has shaped you and your family as the people you are and the dynamic that you have within your
Yeah.
home?
And I think that's a great question because while I just shared how hard it was in the very beginning, and I will definitely say Academy and FTO out of the last 16 years, that was the hardest period out of the last 16 years. So that,
Yeah.
the very beginning was the very hardest. And now I can look
Yeah.
back and say that honestly, there are so many amazing things that have come from his career and have shaped us, not just us as
Mm.
a couple, but as a family. I was telling someone
Yeah.
recently, and I'll talk on kids for a second, about how I really realized, our kids sacrifice in this lifestyle as well. And so it can be very
Mhm.
hard for them sometimes to, understand why daddy can't be, home at dinner time sometimes, or why daddy has to get called out and leave in the middle of the night and they wake up in the morning and he's not there. And it can be hard. And so we had a situation recently where the kids were, my youngest was questioning, he's 6 years old, questioning why, daddy wasn't there. And then my oldest, who's 11, instead of me having to fill in, like how
Mm.
I have all these years and say, well, daddy is out helping somebody else. And it doesn't mean that daddy doesn't want to be here. I give this whole spiel.
Yeah.
My 11-year-old did it. And it's not,
Yeah.
I was right there, but she jumped in and she said, daddy really wants to be here today, but somebody else needs daddy more right now. And I was like, oh my gosh,
Mm.
so to look back,
Yeah.
stand back as a parent for a second and see how these situations shape our children. When we are in the thick of it, it can be really hard and, hurt our hearts as parents. But I think
Yeah.
we're also giving our children skills to be patient, to be
Mhm.
understanding. And we don't see that for a really long time. It's like you don't reap those rewards sometimes for years. My daughter's 11, and I got to
Yeah.
see how empathetic she was to that situation, and also now transfer that and, show that skill to her brother. And then for us as
Mhm.
our relationship, it truly, and this may sound cliche, but it
Mm.
truly has taught my husband and I to really use our time together intentionally and really think about,
Mm.
okay, is this really what we want to spend our day doing? And we, sometimes we only get small chunks of time. We may not get an entire day together or an entire weekend together.
Yeah.
We may have 2 or 3 hours, and so we have to decide, do we want to spend that time doing a bunch of chores, or do we want to do something meaningful as a family? And we can really
Mm.
let time slip by, I think, and that's just normal in life. But in the first responder community, I think you're often reminded about how life is too short, or traumatic things can happen in life because our loved ones are around it all of the time. And so it really
Yeah.
makes us now reflect as a family and how we want to use our time wisely, and how we want to demonstrate that for our kids. And
Mm,
honestly, this is a question I could talk about, I feel like, on and on and on, Lindsay, because there
totally.
really are so many amazing things that have come because of this lifestyle, not only with me being able to connect with the spousal community in so many different ways,
Mhm.
but just that it has taught us so many, I think, life lessons that it
Yeah.
would be, I don't know. I feel like I could step back and say, I don't know if we would have learned all of those life lessons if he had had another job.
Mhm.
But knowing what we know with the line of work that he does, like one thing we also are really adamant about is not leaving each other on bad terms, like,
Mm,
choosing when to have conversations, like, we're
yeah.
not going to have heated topics, or topics where we don't feel like we can finish the conversation if he's leaving for work or the kids are headed to school. We try to be more, I mean, we're not 100% perfect on it, but we always try to aim to have those conversations where we can actually finish those conversations, or we can have time to actually talk, and he's not going to be running out or talking after a stressful day or things like that. And
Right.
I feel like that's one thing that this lifestyle really taught us that we may not have learned somewhere else.
Mm, that's a really interesting point. Like, I think one of the things we talk a lot about on this show is this idea of post-traumatic stress, but
Yeah.
also the connected idea of post-traumatic growth,
Hmm.
right? And that if we let it, we can get really absorbed in talking about the hard and the bad and
Yeah.
the traumatic and the right, the really icky pieces.
Yeah.
And certainly we need to talk about those pieces because they're
Right.
real and they're there, and we can't pretend like they're not. But simultaneously, if we only look at those pieces, we do create a certain kind of a story about what it looks like to be in this job, what it looks like to participate as a person connected to this job. And that tends not to serve anyone particularly well because
Right.
that's not the whole story. And when we
Right.
tell it like it is, the whole story, we're really robbing ourselves of connecting to aspects of this story that bring us a sense of meaning and purpose and value.
Yes.
And frankly, to some extent, that's actually where we get really caught in post traumatic stress and where we experience so much declining like health and wellness within the job, as well as risk factors for things like burnout and compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma and occupational stress injury and so many other pieces that are kind of
Right.
associated there. And so being able to tell the story of like, yeah, these pieces were really hard. It was really hard to adjust. And yet, those adjustments and that process, as uncomfortable as it was, trained us for something that we wouldn't have otherwise created these skill sets for.
Right.
It has grown us and strengthened us in ways that wouldn't otherwise have gifted us with these learnings. And
Absolutely.
while I may not necessarily want to like relive this, I
Yes.
also wouldn't necessarily want to trade out what I got from it because
Right.
in
Right.
a lot of ways it's what makes us our best selves individually, our best
Yeah.
selves as a couple, our best selves as a family.
Yeah.
Like it becomes a part of our story.
Yeah. And I really, yes, I mean, I don't want to go back to the ugly and the messy that was,
Mhm.
years ago when we were going through that, because it really forced us to have a lot of conversations. We
Yeah.
really, and we had a choice. We could stay in the ugly and the messy, or we could talk it out and
Mhm.
figure out, what did he need now, because his needs were
Mhm.
completely different when he got home from work. And
Yeah.
the day after he got home from work, and our expectations of one another, meaning things like, when he got home, I needed to know what type of support he needed, how long he kind of needed time to
Yeah.
decompress. And those weren't things we ever had to have conversations about, but it forced us, and we chose. We said, like,
Yeah.
we've got to figure this out, because
Yeah.
nobody's giving you a blueprint in the academy to say you and your spouse may experience these situations, and here is what
Totally.
you do. And so
Yeah.
we were like, we're going to have these hard conversations, and sometimes, like, it was ugly and it was messy and it was frustrating, and but having those conversations is what led us to now having a really solid, strong relationship that is built off of just taking the time to listen to one another, and
Hmm.
really making sure that we're trying to give each other support and checking in regularly, because even as a
Yeah.
mom, I've changed on what I've needed. Like, we've
Yep.
done like the love language test before. And I remember telling my husband that I wanted to do that. And he was like, whatever. But he did it for me.
Yeah.
And
Good sport.
yep. And originally, my love language has even changed over the years. It used to be
Yes.
physical touch. But now that I have 3 kids, I don't want physical
I'm
touch.
like
Now
touched
it's,
out.
yeah, touched out. I'm like,
Yes.
so it's changed. So I had to say to him, like,
Uh,
look, I don't want that, like all day long, when days I am
mhm.
touched out. Like, words of affirmation is now more important to me. And so just
Yeah.
having those conversations of how you can help each other and how you can support each other, even if you're not physically together. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, it's just, I could talk about it all the time, and just, it's so important, that
Mhm.
communication piece, and to kind of try to keep going through that ugly and messy and hard, because if you're both committed to it and to getting through it as a couple, then I really think most couples can come out the other side and say,
Yeah.
hey, this was the hard, but this is what we're doing now.
Yeah. Well, and it really speaks to the need for adaptability, I think, right? Like, I think I share this piece of your story. My husband and I are also high school sweethearts, and there's good and hard to that because
Yes.
we've known versions of each other, right?
Right,
And so
right,
there's parts of us that still hold each other accountable to being a version of ourselves that we are no longer.
right,
And expectations and wishes to be more like this time in history when
right,
we're not there anymore. We're like,
right,
I'm this person now.
right,
Um, and it can be a beautiful thing because the evolution happens together if
right,
we can let it.
right,
But simultaneously, it can be part of the hardship is trying to like, I may not want to let go of some of these parts of you that you are letting go of, and I don't
right,
want you to let go of them. But it is this piece about like how we have this skill set to communicate, but also how we also have the skill set to hear each other communicate
right,
and be willing to be open to adaptation without feeling um, like defensive or resistant
right.
to the request to shift.
Yep,
Right. So, like,
absolutely.
I remember we used to spend tons and tons of time together, and we used to both be quite extroverted ish. And then when I started working as a therapist, I am peopled out. Like,
Yeah.
I people all day, and I don't just
Yes.
like small talk people, I like deep dive people.
Right.
So at the end of the day, I don't want to have I don't want to go see people. I
Right.
don't want to go out with friends. I actually really want a night in. I really want that night to have like very little conversation a lot of
Yes.
times.
Yes.
And so it's funny because my husband is a musician. He worked from
Oh,
home. It was
nice.
before we had kids. And he would be trapped at home without interaction with other humans all day. And
Right.
he'd be like desperately clamoring for any kind of interaction with me outside of our home. Like, he just wanted to go and be anywhere else, doing anything else,
Yeah.
and having all of the conversation. And initially, it was interesting because my first job happened at a time where we didn't have a bridge that has since been built, and so I was taking this little ferry across the river every day. And some days it was like a 40-minute trip, and other days it was like a 4-hour trip, and it really just depended on the time of year. What was beautiful about that, though, was that I had a lot of time to decompress my day before I arrived home.
That's nice.
And then they built this bridge. And suddenly my commute home was like 20 minutes. And I didn't realize that that was not enough time.
Right.
So I
Yes.
would walk in the door and my husband would be like right there to be like, hey, how was your day? Let's talk. Let's do the things and the
Right.
stuff. And I was like, oh my God, no.
Right.
I
Like,
just,
calm down.
like, oh.
Yes.
And like my whole nervous system would just feel like swamped by it.
Yes.
And I remember it being this really interesting thing because for him, when I'm like, whoa, back off, the feelings rejecting, fair.
Right.
And so it's that piece of like how I need to communicate about it, but also how he can be receptive to, and then vice versa. Like on the flip side, he's like, but I also have a need and I haven't left the house all day and I just need someone to look at me and be like, hi.
Right. Right. Like, acknowledge me.
Right. Right. And so like, can we like negotiate that somehow?
Yes.
And I think the hard thing for a lot of couples is we're not trained in how to do that. Like we're not trained in A, how to do the talking, but also B, how to do the receiving of that without being like, oh, that means you don't love me and you don't want me and you don't like me and your needs matter more than my needs. And right. Like all the ways we interpret that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this like development and progress in us as individual people, and having some of those skill sets at our fingertips is super handy.
Yeah. And I remember years ago, early on, my husband, if he might have had a long day and I'd be like, hey, how was your day? What happened? And I would just get sometimes like one word answers in the beginning because I wasn't giving him that time to decompress. I'm like, are you mad at me? Did I do something wrong? And so, you would just
which is that like more pestery and then more pestery and then it gets shorter and shorter and shorter.
Right. He's like, I'm just tired. I'm like, oh, but now, just many years later into our marriage, like after we put the kids to bed, we'll look at each other and say mindless. We're like, yep. So that means like on the TV, we want something mindless. Like we just want to like zone out. At least we're physically next to each other, but we'll watch something on TV. And it's just mindless. It's just like, you're just watching something and because you don't have the space to have the big conversations or to really do much else. So, and we just have those mindless days. And honestly, some of those days are my favorite because we can just relax with each other and you don't have to say anything. It's just,
Yeah, totally.
Behind the Line is sponsored by Beating the Breaking Point. Beating the Breaking Point is a 7-part online training program designed specifically for first responders and frontline workers, and tailored to fill the gaps in your training to support resilience and sustainability. Whether you're new to the work and wanting to cultivate tools to prevent burnout, compassion fatigue, and related concerns, or you are deep into your years on the job and have gone a few rounds with burnout and other mental health challenges, this program offers the foundational pieces you need to support personal and professional wellness for the long haul. You are a helper. You love your work and you sacrifice a lot. Investing in you and your sustainability is the best gift you can give yourself and those who lean on you. We make this program as risk-free as possible by offering a limited money-back guarantee to ensure that it's a fit for you. If you enjoy Behind the Line, you are going to love this program. Google Beating the Breaking Point Lindsay and find everything you need to get started, or use the link in the show notes. Now, back to the episode.
So let's talk about some of the challenges. I know we've kind of like touched that a lot of the content that is out there talks a lot about the challenges and in ways that I think don't feel super hopeful. I agree with you about that.
Yeah.
So I would love to have this conversation trying to kind of keep that balance. But I would love to hear, like, what have been some of the primary challenges that you've experienced as someone who cares about someone who is out there on the front lines?
Sure. So definitely, like I sort of mentioned earlier, the communication piece was hard because, just some little examples were before I could call him, message him, and I would get a response back. Like in a normal,
Yeah.
what people would quantify a normal amount of time. But with this job, it's, I know that if I'm messaging him, it's not to bother him at work. Like it's might be something with the kids, or I know I'm
Right.
sending it to him and he's probably not going to see it or respond for hours. And so
Yeah.
knowing that he's okay, it's not because your mind can race. It can create
Totally.
that fear when you're doing, you're contacting someone that you love, you're used to one thing and it's completely different. And so, at his job, obviously he can't respond. And it's not that he doesn't
Mhm.
want to, it's not that, he's really not even looking at his phone. So, it
Mhm.
just,
Yeah.
they're involved in so many things that they're not able to. And so it can be hard. I felt like, not only did it initially sort of create fear sometimes because I'd worry, like, I'd see something on Facebook, something was happening in the town, and
Mm.
it's like, okay, is he involved in that? Is he okay? Um,
Mhm.
and I don't have those fears anymore, really, only because
Mm.
one, you kind of learn that no news is good news, and
Yeah.
I'm so preoccupied with kids and things like that. And I really do trust his training. And we have
Yeah.
sort of um, kind of protocols for emergencies. Like as a family, we've talked about
Mhm.
things, but one of the big challenges was fear initially. And then also with the communication piece, um, we might mention something to one another, in a text message, but we may not finish that conversation for like days later because
Yeah.
we might not see each other for 2 days, 3 days, other than in passing. It's because if his
Mhm.
schedule is completely different, then he's sleeping when I would be at work or
Yep.
the kids are at school. And so
Yeah.
you have to get used to, and that's why I talked about earlier, it forced us to get intentional as to when we were having conversations, because it can be brutal when you want to tell your spouse something, especially if maybe you're excited about something about your day and you don't get that time.
Mm.
So that's definitely a challenge. One of the other larger challenges that I know our community deals with, and one that I've dealt with myself, and I think for me it's on a different level,
Mm.
because I have public pages in support of police,
Yeah.
but it has been challenging over the past few years, especially seeing the negativity out there for
Mm.
um, first responders, but law enforcement in particular. And it's
Yes.
really difficult to see that people aren't getting always the full picture, or you might see a few clips
Mhm.
on social media and things like that. And I think the hardest piece is that when bad things happen, which no one supports, but when bad things
Yeah.
happen, um, law enforcement gets lumped in as a whole. And so it can be
Yeah.
really hard to process that, because luckily we did not deal with a lot of friends and family that were negative. They're all very supportive for us, but
Mm.
I do have friends that have dealt with friends and family that were even negative towards law enforcement,
Mm.
just because of something they saw on the news, or
Right.
their views changed. And it can be hard. It can be hard to process that. It can be um, hard to find the words to have those conversations with people when they want to have
Yeah.
them. And it can be hard to, one, be processing those emotions yourself, and maybe you're angry or sad that people don't understand, or frustrated, while also
Mm.
trying to still give support to your loved one and be more positive, and not let
Yeah.
them always see those emotions, because they deal with that. And not only are they dealing with just seeing people on their worst of days a lot of times, but
Mhm.
they do get that negativity. And so on the home front, we want to have this safe place where they come home to, and we are their support
Mm.
system. And so I know that it can be hard to open up and say, hey, it's really hard to see other people be negative when they already know it's there.
Yeah.
So that's just, I think, as a family dynamic, that can be really difficult to experience.
Yeah, I can only imagine that that would be this added layer. And I mean, it makes me wonder and kind of get curious about what that looks like as like even as kids face some of those
Right.
layers in their like your kids I think are still little enough that
Yep.
probably that doesn't factor into their own peer conversations and interactions, but what that might look like if they were a little older
Yeah.
and more influenced by some of those pieces in like high school, college level
Right.
kinds of
Right.
interactions. That's like a whole new piece that I hadn't even really thought of
Yeah.
about how that might feel to be in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
And our
So on the
oldest,
flip,
oh, sorry,
yeah.
Lindsay. I would
No,
say
go
our
ahead.
oldest has gotten a couple questions before. And so
Hmm.
she had come to me and said, someone said something about, a police officer, like it was in a book. And so, but a child
Hmm.
made a negative remark and she didn't say anything to that child, but then came home to me and said, she was just really surprised. Like, why would someone say that? And so, we
Yeah.
talked about how, you know, they may have had, people have their own experiences, but this is what we
Hmm.
can do. Like, yes, that person said that, but, here's what we can do as, an 11-year-old. And so just having those
Hmm.
conversations and then supporting her. And so we've had just little things like that, but we also,
Hmm.
in my book, I shared about how we were in the area where my husband works and we're just sitting at a stoplight. And it was during 2020 when there were a lot of protests and riots, and there
Yeah.
was going to be one that evening. And so this was earlier in the day, though, like 3, 4 o'clock. But a car pulled up beside us at the stoplight, and my 11-year-old even then could read, and it had
Hmm.
very hateful, derogatory words to law
Hmm.
enforcement. And she read them and was like, I don't understand why someone would put that on their car. And so we had to have, a lot of conversations
Yeah.
about that and just hard talks about that. And so
Hmm.
little things have happened here and there. Luckily, it's not, you know, huge. But we've just, we've still had to have those conversations at even a young age.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and again, like no blueprint. We
Right,
talk about that in terms of marriage, but also parenting. And we talk about that in terms of parenting generally, no matter what profession you're in.
right.
But certainly there's no blueprint for how to have some of those conversations
Yeah,
about, right? Like how to make sense of the world that we're living in, particularly when we have a parent who is so directly associated to some of those pieces.
right, right.
Hmm. Hmm. I'm curious on the flip side, what some of the experiences have been that you've really valued or treasured as a loved one of someone on the front lines. So, kind of setting the challenges over here for a second. What are some of the pieces that I know we were talking earlier about kind of the gifts that this gives? Are
Yeah,
there some that feel like really tangible for you?
sure. One, and the biggest I would have to say is the community.
Mm,
I have found a huge community with other just first responder spouses in general and even
hmm.
military spouses. And
Yeah.
that, there are so many different similarities. And I didn't realize that at first, but, when we lived in our first house and my husband first started the job, I had a neighbor and they had moved in and her husband was deploying around
Yeah.
the same time that my husband was starting his job. And so we just had so many similarities together. And so it was so
Mm,
great to have a community. And while it took a while, it wasn't like instantaneous. My husband started the job
yeah.
and boom, here's this community. I had to be like open and receptive because
Hmm.
um, not everyone understands what it's like to be married to, a first responder or a frontline worker. And,
Yeah.
but it was eye opening to me that when I did kind of let those people in and share about it, it was just nice to have other people that get it, that to have other people that understand. So
Mm.
community is the biggest because day after day, I think it's so important to, in this lifestyle and really life in general, to have that support system, have a support system of
Yeah.
people in some way that you trust. And with my husband's job, it's been so nice to have a community of people that just, I can call quickly if I have a question, or if my husband is, maybe we had plans and my husband gets called out, I can say, hey, we have to rearrange.
Mm.
They just get it. And it's not, you don't have to
Yeah.
go into this huge background story. And it's just nice. It's nice to feel heard and feel seen by having that
Mm.
community. And so, for anybody listening that might be a significant other, I would just say be open to like a lot of these women I've met on Instagram, which some people might be like, what?
Mhm.
But it's because I have a public page, and so people, will message me.
Yeah.
And it's just been nice. The other thing too is like I hold this annual conference for first responder families every year called the annual Police Wife Conference, and it's virtual. And we have a Facebook group for the conference, and
Mm.
so like even in the introduction post, wives will be in there, or significant others will be there and say, hey, oh, you're from Minnesota, I'm from Minnesota too. And like then they get talking.
Yeah.
And so it's just, by happenstance, by being open and sharing a little bit, that you can meet other people. And it doesn't just have to be like in your hometown. I have a few that are
Mhm.
local to me, but, I also realized too that, it doesn't just have to be another police spouse or another fire spouse. Like I have a friend that relates to a lot of what I go through. Her husband owns a
Mm.
car dealership. So he works really long
Yeah.
hours on the weekends. And so she is kind of quote unquote solo parenting a lot. And so those are the aspects
Totally.
we can relate to one another. It's not everything, but there's overlap. And so,
Yeah.
also knowing that there's other people out there that, you know, can semi relate or want to try to relate. And it's just nice
Yeah.
to have that piece. The other thing is too with, some of the positives is this lifestyle has really taught us, like I mentioned earlier, to be just very intentional with our time, with
Mm.
how we choose to spend our time together as a family, what we choose to do, and how we raise our kids. And it's been a huge blessing to us, and I feel like
Mm.
we've been able to just connect with other people who also kind of see that intentionality and how it's really important to have that. And maybe they are, another frontline worker, family. And we have a
Yeah.
family that we're really close with, that they're not first responders, but just another, like, blue collar family that they understand what it's like. And so it's really nice to share those commonalities just with, other people. And
Mhm.
it's taught us again to like have that support system. And the other thing I have to say too is it's really taught me to be flexible and independent and try to find a balance of those
Mm.
two, because
Yeah.
um, because of his job, his plans change a lot, and I can't control that,
Yeah.
and neither can he. And so
Mhm.
I have a funny story in a minute that I'll share, but it's taught me to
Okay.
just be flexible because we can't control what's happening. And so, I have plan A, plan B, plan C. Sometimes I have to go back to plan A after I try plan C. And so,
Yeah.
being
Totally.
flexible, and I've always been a pretty independent person, but it
Mm.
has been, really taught me that, okay, like I'm not going to call my husband while he's at work because the toilet's broken. Instead, I'm going to get on YouTube and I'm going to
Mhm.
figure out how to fix it myself. And so,
Yeah.
things like that, that I don't think,
Totally.
I would have maybe done otherwise. Who knows? Um,
Mm.
and I said I was going to tell you something, and now I forget what it was. Oh my
Funny
gosh. It was
story.
a funny story. Okay, I remember. So I remember one time, my husband came home. We had, a newborn. I think our daughter was like 3 months old at the time. And I
Mm,
remember saying to him, like, I am so tired. Like, I was up with her all night long. I really need you, when he came home to like take
yeah,
time with the baby. And he's like, well, I'm tired. I dealt with this, and this. And we kept
right.
going back and forth about who was more tired. And then finally we looked at each other and we're like, this is ridiculous. This is silly right now. And so now we can look back and say, like, you know, another thing that this has taught us is there's no comparison game. We don't have to compare as to
Mhm.
who's more tired or who did more in their day, because our days are going to be drastically different, and that's
Yeah,
okay. But it's not a competition. We can either continue to argue and compare about who's more tired and who needs to do this, or we can say, look, we're both tired and we're going to tag team and work this out, together. And
yeah,
so, um, it was just funny in the moment to be like, I'm tired. No, I'm more tired. And we can look
totally. Like,
back
let's
and be
arm
like,
wrestle over it.
right, like, this is so silly. This is not,
Uh,
a comparison game, and so it's really also
mhm,
taught us to, just work as a team, because I'm sure you
mhm.
can learn that many ways. You don't have to be a first responder family, but that's just one thing that's really, helped us, because when there's a lot of times where we're not together and I'm solo
Yeah,
parenting and he's at work, but when we are together, like, let's really, combine forces here, and let's really work together to do whatever it is we need to do, or have those conversations, because
yeah.
we're always going to be tired. Kids make you tired. Like, life is tiring
Such
sometimes.
is
So,
life. Yep,
right, exactly.
totally. Totally true. Okay. So my last real big question for you actually wasn't even in the list of questions I sent you. I just thought of it and I'm disappointed I didn't include it when I sent
That's
those off.
okay.
And it's this. As someone who is solo parenting and is navigating the ever changing circumstances of partnering someone who is working on the front lines, what do you do for your own health and wellness? Like, what does that look like for you? What have been your like key learnings and growing areas in making sure that you're good? Because I think that the thing is that if we're not good, ain't nobody good.
Right. Yeah.
Like when you're mom, when you're that kind of like hub piece of the family dynamic,
Yes.
it does really rely on you being good. And I think the challenge for a lot of um, moms, a lot of parents, a lot of people who find themselves in that kind of hub role
Yeah.
is that the role invites us to prioritize everyone else's needs first and ours last. And the
Yes.
downside to that is it's not sustainable.
Right.
So, what does it look like for you to try to find some sustainability for yourself? And what are some of the pieces that you might encourage others to consider as they shape that for themselves?
I'm so glad you asked this, actually, because I'm really passionate about this. And so this is great.
Yeah.
And first, my biggest piece of advice, for anybody listening, is have a life outside of law enforcement or outside of whatever career it is,
Amen.
because I cannot preach this
Mhm.
enough. And,
Yeah.
we have spouses that work in these career fields, but this lifestyle does not, yes, it impacts us, but it doesn't need to be all of us. And so,
Yeah.
and for me, I really had to stick to that, only because my work is now similar to,
Yeah.
well, I don't want to say similar to what my husband does, because it's in no way, shape, or form like that.
It's
Um,
very
but
adjacent.
yes, it is, it's in it
Yeah.
supporting the spouses. And so I, again, went from being a stay at home mom to now having, talking with spouses day in and day out. I was also getting peopled out and getting,
Mhm.
just hearing about everyone's circumstances and kind of taking those burdens on myself. And it was exhausting some days. And I had to find ways to have boundaries. And so for me, um, when I, started all of this, I love to write. So it was interesting, because I thought, okay, how can I reach this community? And for me, it was writing. So, which is why I
Mhm.
started the blog, because writing for me was just a great outlet. Well, I got so kind of consumed by it. I would write, go like put my kids to bed, go down in my little office in the basement and I would write from like 8 p.m. to like midnight or 1
Yeah.
a.m. until I got really burned out and
Yep.
from literally everything. And it sort
Mm.
of tied to my husband's job only because, yes, I was my own person, but I was writing about aspects of his job and how it impacted us. And so then, hearing all these stories from other spouses, I needed a way to find something that would just help me put those boundaries in place. And so for me, it was just eye opening. Like after our last child was born 6 years ago, it was around that same time. I'd been doing the blog for about a year. He was about 1 year old. And I told my husband, I'm like, I literally need to find new things for myself because all it is being a mom and doing this work, which I love doing. It wasn't that. It was just that I needed to disconnect in some way.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was having those conversations with my husband at first and telling him, look, there was a point where I was struggling and I was like, I am not doing anything for myself. And I'm, writing to wee hours in the morning, then getting up with the kids, doing all the mom things, and then
Mhm.
desperately wanting to have time with my husband, but his schedule was different. And so the only time we had
Yeah.
time together, we wanted time as a family. Like I didn't want to cut that short for us because I wanted him to be with the kids too. And so we had conversations about one, him supporting me in making sure I had just time away and quiet time.
Yeah.
And I needed time to, like, it sounds silly, but as a mom, you might be able to relate, just take a shower without little fingers under the door saying, mommy, mommy, or slipping me notes.
Mhm.
And so he's really good. He was really good at, saying, hey, kids, let's go outside so that I could actually have
Yeah.
a shower or I could go, listen to music and just, do what I needed to do around the house. Or some days it was just
Mm.
I meandered around Target or the mall by myself because
Yes.
I just needed like quiet time to like be with
Yeah.
myself. And
Mhm.
so it's changed over the years, but now one kind of, I think, big piece of my husband and I's story is we both wanted changes, not just we wanted things different for individually, like for each of us, for my
Mm.
husband, for myself, and then we wanted changes for our family. And one of the things that we did was we moved away out of the neighborhood that we had been in and we bought land. And now we have a house and
Mm.
we wanted just for us, what was really important was nature and being outside,
Yeah.
and having that for our kids. And that is what
Mm.
allowed both of us to really just decompress and really, excuse me, um, be better at reaching like our optimal wellness day in and day out. And even when days are crazy or busy, we can step outside and like breathe fresh air and not hear
Yeah.
another sound for miles. And, we have
Yeah.
18 acres and, I can hear my chickens out in the back.
Mm.
But I needed to find sort of new things that I liked and that didn't involve being a mom and didn't involve just, my work and writing. Because writing, while it was an outlet at one time, it's not that anymore. It's work
Yeah.
now. And so
It's a
that
job.
that changed
Yeah.
for me. And so I needed to find something different. And so for me now,
Mm.
that's like gardening, and I have a
Mhm.
massive garden, and I love doing that and being with my animals. We have farm animals and being with them outside. And my husband, it's
Mhm.
he can just go for acres and walk on the trails or hunt. And so we have
Mhm.
those things individually that we both need. And now we really make it a priority. It's a little easier that our kids are slightly older at, 11, 9,
Yeah.
and 6, that we can say, like, oh, daddy's outside for the morning. He'll be back in a little bit. And there's not as many
Mhm.
meltdowns now, but they're
Mhm.
understanding of that. But we really had to support each other so that we could both have that better wellness. And not just for our family, but to be like the best versions of ourselves and have that peace. And some weeks are harder than others. If your kids get sick, or my husband just had an on-call week. But really, that's my biggest piece of advice is, as have a life outside of law enforcement or whatever job it is, your job, your spouse's job, and truly find what it is that you're passionate about and be on the same page with your spouse to make sure you're each getting that.
Totally. It's a solid piece of advice. I think we talk a lot about the risks within the job of over identifying with the job.
Yes.
And I have this rant that I often go on about how we actually do a disservice, and we do this to kids from the time they're really little, where we say things like, what are you going to be when you grow up?
Mm-hmm.
And we don't say like, what are you going to do for a living when you grow up? We say, what are you going to be?
Right,
Like,
right.
even the language in that is really laden with, this is going to identify who you are as a human, whatever the answer to this question is. And within first response and frontline work, there's this like additional layer of invitation, because it's not only a job, it is a family. Like it often has these ties to like brotherhood and whatever that further enhances the sense of invitation to over identify with it. These aren't just my coworkers, these are my people.
Right.
And there's beauty to aspects of that, but also a lot of risks and danger inherent to it.
Yes.
And I think that we all have invitations to that. I think as moms, there's a huge invitation to over identifying with our mom role, where like, now I'm just a mom.
Right.
And how many moms do I talk to who are like, I don't even know what I like anymore. Like, I don't even know what food I would choose if I was only choosing for me, because I literally think of what anyone else in my house will or won't eat before I would think of what I care to eat.
Yes.
Right? Like, we do this in lots of areas. And yet it's really important for us to retain a sense, and if we've lost it, to reconstruct a sense of who I choose to be in the world. And a piece of that is the mom hat I wear, and a piece of that is the spouse hat I wear, and a piece of that is the, support person to a first responder hat that I wear. But those are hats. Like, who am I under the hat?
Yes.
And who do I choose to be? How do I choose to engage this world? Knowing that some of those hats are also like impermanent. Right? If my spouse were to no longer be a first responder, how would that change who I am?
Right.
And if it feels like that would change a lot, then that says something about maybe how much we're over identifying. If we imagine when our kids are grown and no longer in our house, how much that will change our lives, that maybe says something about how we're perhaps over identifying with that role.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, yes, it will change your life, but if it feels like it's like that would absolutely catastrophically change how I feel in my day-to-day living, that's a lot. That's a lot that we're identifying with that role.
Definitely.
Yeah.
No, I agree.
Good one.
much.
I love it, Rebecca. That was a great spot to wrap up on. Okay, so before we end, I also want us to have a real quick chat about some of the resources that you offer.
Sure.
I know we mentioned at the very start your website. I know you've mentioned in passing your book and the conference. So do you want to just talk real quick about that? And we will also make sure that we post links to all of those pieces on in the show notes for the show. And so if anyone's looking for any of that information, they can hop into the show notes and find all of it. But why don't you just do a real quick piece about that?
Sure. So the conference is, 5 years ago, I developed something called the Annual Police Wife Conference, but really first responder, anyone is welcome to attend. And I wanted to find a way before it was like the cool thing to do before, with COVID,
before it was a thing.
Right. To bring together people virtually. So all online, because I felt like there were so many amazing resources across the country, but it was either one, really expensive for people to access them. And a lot of times these people were coming to departments and spouses were not able to attend. And I really think, there's a time and place. There are certain speakers are great just for the officer or the first responder, but there's others that really talk about, impacts that I think are really important for the family to hear. And so one, expense. The other was just time. People didn't have time to take off work or get childcare or get together, at the same time with their spouse. And so I wanted to make all these amazing resources and speakers very accessible for our community.
Mhm.
So I hold something called the Annual Police Wife Conference. This year is our 5th year, and we always have, several thousand families signed up, which is incredible.
Yeah.
But it's 5 days. This year it's April 24th to 28th, 2023. And I'll give Lindsay the link for you guys to check it out in the show notes. But general admission pass is absolutely free. So you get access to the
Mm.
videos. We have 10 plus expert speakers. This year, our keynote speaker is Taya Kyle. She's the widow of American sniper Chris Kyle, founder of the Taya and Chris Kyle
Mhm.
Foundation and New York Times bestselling author. But we also have so many other amazing speakers that are coming on. And we're talking about our huge focus this year is wellness, nutrition, sleep, breaking
Mhm.
unhealthy habits and how you can actually do that as a first responder
Yeah.
family. And so really, really practical tips and resources that work for not just law enforcement, but many
Mhm.
listeners. And no matter what, you know, career path your spouse might be on. But it's 5 days. 2 videos are dripped out per day. There's also amazing prizes that people can win
Mhm.
just by registering from really supportive brands. Um, and then we have that Facebook group that people can join if they're part of the conference. That is just a great place to have community, ask questions, get to know other people in a safe space that, um, you know, just relate to this lifestyle. So I hope you guys
Yeah.
will join us. There's also other passes if you want to be able to access the videos, not just for the 1 week of the conference. Then we have the VIP and lifetime
Mm.
pass so you can get access longer. Also, we have some people even that have groups or organizations or spousal groups, and they contact me via email and they buy group passes. So then everybody can get together and
Yeah.
watch and do like a watch party sort of thing, which is really neat
Nice.
too.
Yeah.
That's like a great way to do that. And so,
Mhm.
I hope you guys will check it out. And then, yes, my website, proudpolicewife.com. And then I have 2 books. My newest book, though, is Proud Police Wife 90 Devotions for Women Behind the Badge. And that's available on Amazon, Target Online, Barnes& and Noble Online. And Lindsay will get all those links for you guys.
Absolutely. I will make sure they are all posted in the show notes. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Rebecca, for
Thank
being here
you.
and for taking the time with me. It's been great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored.
Please join me in extending one more big thank you to Rebecca for taking the time and sharing her journey and experience today. All of the amazing resources she mentioned today will be linked in the show notes, so be sure to go and check those out. As we wrap up today, let me remind you that if you value this podcast and want to help us in our mission to support frontline wellness, there are 3 ways you can do just that. Number 1, rate and review Behind the Line on Apple Podcast or wherever you're listening. Number 2, follow me on social media at Lindsay A. Foss and engage with me and this amazing little community that we're building there. Every time that you like, comment, and share our posts, you are using your power to help us spread like wildfire, thanks to the magic of the algorithm. And number 3, share this resource and our other resources with those you know. If you would like a poster or info cards about the podcast for your workplace, send me an email to support@thrive-life.ca. Know that we can be found online on our website, on most major podcast platforms, as well as on YouTube. We make all of our resources available to you because the work you do matters. But way more than that, you matter. And we want to make sure that you have what you need to keep up the good work at work, as well as in your real life outside of the work you do. So use it and share it. And until next time, stay safe.